This is the image they tried to bury: a conference room in Ottawa, Monday morning, February 24th, 2026, and the flags of 12 sovereign nations are lined up behind a single podium. Canada, Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, Singapore, Mexico, Vietnam, Malaysia, Chile, New Zealand, Peru, and Brunei. For the first time in modern history, a sitting American president's own military allies and trade partners have formed a unified economic coalition designed to root around the United States of America. Not against China, not against Russia, against us, against Trump's tariffs. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, is standing at that podium with the quiet confidence of a man who just reshaped the global economic order. He is reading from a joint declaration that effectively says the following: "We no longer trust the United States to lead." The room is silent, the cameras are rolling, and the White House, according to sources inside the West Wing, did not see this coming. Not like this, not this fast, not with this many countries. We are talking about a combined GDP of over $28 trillion. We are talking about 1.5 billion consumers. We are talking about a trade corridor that now stretches from London to Tokyo to Santiago without a single American dollar touching it. President Trump, already reeling from Friday's Supreme Court ruling that struck down his IEEPA tariffs in a devastating 6-3 decision, is now facing the geopolitical equivalent of a margin call. The world just moved on, and they did it while he was tweeting about the ruling being a disgrace. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly how Canada built this alliance behind closed doors. We are going to explain the financial architecture that makes it lethal to American exporters. We are going to show you the $4.7 trillion in annual trade that is about to bypass the United States entirely. And we are going to answer the question nobody in Washington wants to ask: has America just lost the global trade war it started? Buckle up. The maps are being redrawn in real time. To understand how 12 nations ended up aligned against the United States on a Monday morning in February, you have to go back to January 29th, 2026. That is the day Mark Carney stood at the podium of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and delivered what diplomatic sources are now calling the most consequential economic speech since Bretton Woods. He told the assembled global elite that the rules-based international order was partially false, that the strongest had always exempted themselves when convenient, and that trade rules had been enforced asymmetrically. He was talking about the United States. Everyone in that room knew it. But here is what the mainstream media buried in their coverage. Carney did not just give a speech. According to leaked diplomatic cables reported by Politico, he used the Davos gathering as a recruitment event. Behind closed doors, in private meetings with trade ministers from Japan, Australia, Singapore, and the European Union, he laid out a specific proposal: align the rules of origin between the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, and the European Union's existing trade framework. Within days, he dispatched his personal representative, John Hannaford, to Singapore to solicit the views of regional leaders. A Canadian government official told Politico that the work was coming along and that they had had very fruitful discussions with partners around the world. That was diplomatic code for the deal is almost done. Here is what you need to understand about rules of origin, because this is the financial plumbing that makes the entire alliance work. When a product is manufactured in Vietnam using Japanese components and Australian raw materials, the rules of origin determine which country gets the tariff credit. Under the old system, that product would need to meet specific regional content requirements to qualify for preferential tariff treatment in any given market. What Carney proposed is called cumulation. It means that components from any member of this new bloc can count toward the origin threshold of any other member. A car assembled in Mexico with a British engine, Japanese electronics, and Australian steel can now enter the Canadian, EU, and Japanese markets at preferential rates as low as 6%. The same car trying to enter the United States faces a 25% tariff under Section 232 on the steel alone, plus whatever remains of the reciprocal tariff regime that Trump is scrambling to reconstruct after the Supreme Court gutted his IEEPA authority 4 days ago on February 20th. Let me put this in numbers that matter to your wallet. The United States exported $2.1 trillion in goods last year. According to data from the Peterson Institute, approximately $1.4 trillion of that went to countries that are now part of or actively negotiating with Carney's coalition. We are talking about Canada, which takes $350 billion a year in American goods. We are talking about Japan at $85 billion, the United Kingdom at $76 billion, Australia at $38 billion, Mexico at $323 billion. These are not abstract numbers. These are American factory orders. These are American jobs. These are the soybeans from Iowa, the natural gas from Pennsylvania, and the semiconductors from Arizona that keep this economy running. And the alliance has a built-in incentive structure that punishes trading with the United States. If a Japanese manufacturer sources its aluminum from Canada instead of America, it gets preferential access to 40 markets. If it sources from America, it gets hit with retaliatory tariffs that multiple coalition members have maintained since March 2025. The math is brutal. The economics are merciless. American suppliers are about to become the most expensive option on the planet. But here is the catch that nobody is talking about. Sources inside the Canadian Foreign Ministry, speaking on condition of anonymity, confirm that the alliance includes a mutual defense clause against economic coercion. It is modeled on Article 5 of NATO, but for trade. If the United States imposes punitive tariffs on any single member of the coalition, the other 11 have agreed to collectively redirect procurement, impose reciprocal duties, and accelerate bilateral trade with the targeted nation. This is unprecedented. This is the economic equivalent of a mutual defense pact. If Trump tariffs Japan, 12 nations retaliate. If he tariffs Canada again, 12 nations absorb Canada's exports and cut American ones. The entire divide and conquer strategy of the Trump trade war is dead. Canada just built a wall, and they made America pay for it in lost export revenue. This is where the situation moves from economic dispute to geopolitical catastrophe. Sources inside the White House describe the mood as thermonuclear. The president reportedly learned about the formal coalition announcement from Fox News on Monday morning, not from his own intelligence briefing. His national security advisor, according to two people familiar with the conversation, was on the phone with the State Department at 7:15 a.m. Eastern, demanding to know how 12 allied nations coordinated a trade alliance without a single American intelligence intercept flagging it. The answer is devastating. They used existing diplomatic channels, the CPTPP and CETA frameworks, and they classified the negotiations under standard trade consultation protocols. Canada outmaneuvered the entire U.S. intelligence apparatus by hiding the revolution inside the bureaucracy. Think about what that means for American credibility. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the most sophisticated signals intelligence partnership in human history, comprising the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and 3 of its 5 members just joined an economic coalition designed to counter American trade policy without Washington noticing. Sources at the Pentagon speaking on deep background say the intelligence failure is being treated with the same urgency as a missed military threat assessment. The National Security Council has reportedly ordered a full review of diplomatic communications intercepts with allied nations. This is what happens when a president treats allies as adversaries. They start acting like adversaries. They encrypt, they compartmentalize, they use back channels, and they build alliances that America cannot see coming until the flags are already lined up behind the podium. The psychological impact on Trump cannot be overstated. According to people who have spoken to the president in the last 48 hours, he views the Carney alliance as a personal betrayal. He reportedly told aides that Canada is a hostile nation, that Carney is worse than Trudeau, and that the United States should consider withdrawing from NORAD. This is not rational policy. This is a narcissistic wound. Trump built his political identity on being the dealmaker who could bend nations to his will. The tariffs were his signature weapon. And now 12 countries have collectively said your weapon does not work anymore. We built a shield. For a man who defines his presidency by dominance, being outmaneuvered by the former governor of the Bank of England is a humiliation that cuts deeper than any court ruling. Sources say he spent Monday morning calling Republican senators not to discuss the alliance, but to demand they publicly attack Carney. The policy response is secondary. The ego response comes first. That is what makes the next 72 hours so dangerous. Let us talk about the immediate economic fallout, because this is where your 401k enters the conversation. The bond market opened Monday with a flash sell-off in U.S. Treasuries. The yield on the 10-year note jumped 14 basis points in the first 90 minutes. Why? Because foreign central banks, particularly the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England, are signaling through their actions that they may begin diversifying reserve holdings away from U.S. dollar assets. When 12 nations form a trade bloc that routes around the dollar, the demand for dollars in international trade settlements declines. When demand for dollars declines, the value of every treasury bond, every dollar-denominated asset, and every American pension fund takes the hit. We are talking about $7.6 trillion in foreign-held U.S. government debt. If even 5% of that gets redirected into euro or yen instruments, the Federal Reserve is looking at a funding crisis that makes the 2023 debt ceiling fight look like a rehearsal. It gets worse. The Supreme Court ruling on Friday struck down the IEEPA tariffs that formed the backbone of Trump's trade strategy. The Tax Foundation estimates that over $160 billion in tariffs were illegally collected and must now be refunded to importers. The administration responded by invoking Section 122, slapping a 15% baseline tariff on imports. But Section 122 expires after 150 days. That means by mid-July, the president will have no legal authority to maintain the tariff levels that started this entire war. Carney knows this. The coalition knows this. They are building their alliance on a timeline that perfectly coincides with the expiration of Trump's last remaining tariff authority. By the time the 150 days expire, the new trade routes will be established, the supply chains will be redirected, and American exporters will find that the doors they used to walk through have been permanently bolted from the other side. Here is what the data shows about the damage already baked in. The Yale Budget Lab estimates that the remaining Section 232 tariffs will reduce U.S. GDP by 0.2% permanently, the equivalent of roughly $30 billion in lost output every single year. The tariffs will increase unemployment by 0.3 percentage points, translating to approximately 550,000 American jobs lost by end of 2026. The average American household is paying $400 more per year from just the tariffs that survived the court ruling. Before the ruling, that number was $1,300. Now add the coalition effect. If 12 nations redirect even 10% of their U.S. trade to intra-coalition partners, economic models suggest an additional 0.4% GDP reduction over 5 years, or $120 billion in cumulative lost output. American farmers in the Midwest who depend on Canadian and Japanese markets for soybeans, pork, and wheat are staring at a scenario where their two largest foreign customers just agreed to buy from each other instead. Let us push the scenario to its worst case. It is July 2026. The Section 122 tariffs have expired. The president has no congressional authorization for new tariffs because the House of Representatives, which voted in February to repeal the Canadian tariffs by 219 to 211, will not hand him a blank check. The CUSMA joint review is scheduled for July 1st. Canada and Mexico walk into that review with the coalition at their backs. They do not need CUSMA anymore. They have alternatives. The negotiating leverage has completely inverted. In this scenario, American manufacturers who retooled their supply chains to comply with Trump's tariff regime face a double punishment. They moved production to avoid tariffs that no longer exist, and they lost preferential access to markets that moved on without them. The auto industry is the canary in the coal mine. U.S. automakers now account for just 23% of vehicles assembled in Canada, down from 56% a decade ago. The coalition accelerates that trend. Japanese, Korean, and European automakers with plants across the CPTPP and EU zones can now ship components freely across 40 nations at preferential rates. American automakers pay full freight. Detroit dies a second death. And the secondary victims are not in boardrooms, they are in break rooms. The factory worker in Ohio who builds transmission components for export to Canada, the longshoreman in Long Beach who loads containers bound for Japan, the soybean farmer in Missouri who sold half his crop to Mexican food processors. These are the people who will see their orders dry up first, their hours cut first, their plants shuttered first. The coalition does not target them intentionally. It does not need to. When 12 nations agree to buy from each other instead of America, the demand simply evaporates. No pink slip, no announcement, just silence where there used to be purchase orders. By the time the unemployment data catches up to the reality, the damage is structural. These are not jobs that come back when a new president takes office. These are jobs that migrate to coalition countries and stay there. How does this play with the base? Here is the fracture. The MAGA faithful see Carney as a globalist villain. They see the alliance as proof that the world is conspiring against Trump. Expect donations to spike. Expect rally crowds to swell. But here is the problem. The donors, the Wall Street money, the Fortune 500 CEOs who backed Trump in 2024, they read balance sheets, not bumper stickers. They see $1.4 trillion in export markets tilting away from American companies. They see retaliatory tariffs eating their margins. They see a president who just lost his primary trade weapon in court and is now losing his allies to Canada. The invisible primary for 2028 starts today. The big money is watching this and calculating exit strategies. When the populist base is screaming fight and the donor class is whispering retreat, the coalition fractures. That fracture is already visible. Republican senators from export-dependent states, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, are privately expressing alarm. They backed tariffs when tariffs meant leverage. They did not sign up for economic isolation. What does Putin think when he sees this? What does Xi Jinping think? They see exactly what they have always wanted: an America that has alienated its own allies so thoroughly that they have built an economic architecture without Washington. China has already struck its own deal with Canada, cutting tariffs on canola to 15% from 84% and opening a $4 billion agricultural market that American farmers used to dominate. Beijing is watching the coalition form and calculating that this is the moment to offer sweetheart deals to every member. Singapore gets infrastructure investment. Vietnam gets technology transfer. Australia gets rare earth guarantees. Every nation in the coalition becomes a bidding war between China and the EU, and the United States is not even at the table. If Trump cannot stop Mark Carney, how is he going to stop the People's Liberation Army? The projection of American power relies on the projection of economic stability. The coalition announcement is a billboard advertising American instability to the world. History teaches us that cornered leaders make desperate moves. In 1930, when Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, it triggered a cascade of retaliatory tariffs that deepened the Great Depression and shrank global trade by 65%. The architects of that disaster believed, as Trump believes now, that tariffs would force trading partners to capitulate. They were wrong then. They are catastrophically wrong now. The difference is that in 1930, there was no alternative architecture waiting in the wings. Today there is. Carney built it. The CPTPP existed as a framework. CETA existed as a bridge to Europe. All he did was connect the wiring. This is exactly what the founders of the post-war trading system feared, that American arrogance would eventually create the conditions for American irrelevance. The architects of the Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods, and the GATT understood that American leadership required generosity, not domination. Tariffs are the language of domination. The world has responded in the only language that matters. They left. This is not celebrity gossip. This is the stress test of American economic supremacy. Can the dollar maintain its reserve currency status when 12 allied nations are actively building settlement systems that bypass it? Can American exporters compete when the rest of the world has agreed to give each other preferential treatment? Can a president who lost his tariff authority, lost his Supreme Court case, and lost the confidence of his own allies still claim to be making America great again? We are in uncharted waters. The maps drawn at Bretton Woods, at the founding of the WTO, at the signing of NAFTA, those maps are useless now. The irony is almost unbearable. Trump's tariffs were supposed to bring manufacturing home. Instead, they sent America's allies into each other's arms. The policy designed to make America first has made America alone. The world that American policymakers assumed would always exist, a world where the United States sat at the center of every trade route, has been dismantled in 60 days by a former central banker with a phone and a plan. Let us get technical about the mechanism that will eviscerate American agriculture, because this is the sector where the coalition strikes hardest and fastest. Canada has already locked in a deal with China to lower canola tariffs from 84% to 15% by March 1st, 2026, unlocking $4 billion in annual exports. Canadian lobster, peas, and crab will see anti-discrimination tariffs removed entirely. Canada also signed a new trade agreement with Indonesia in 2025, relaunched negotiations with India, and opened formal talks with the UAE, Thailand, and the Mercosur bloc covering Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Each of these agreements feeds into the coalition architecture. Every bushel of Canadian wheat that enters a new market is a bushel of American wheat that gets replaced. The USDA reports that agricultural exports to Canada alone were worth $28 billion in 2024. If even a third of that gets redirected to intra-coalition suppliers through preferential accumulation rules, American farming communities face a financial hemorrhage that no subsidy program can staunch. Here is the second worst-case scenario that keeps trade analysts awake at night. The coalition does not just divert existing trade, it creates new trade that never existed before. When Vietnam and Australia get preferential access to the European Union through rules of origin accumulation, they start manufacturing products specifically designed for the EU market using coalition supply chains. These are products that American companies would have manufactured if they had access to the same preferential terms, but they do not. They are locked out. New factories get built in coalition countries. New jobs get created in coalition countries. New intellectual property gets developed in coalition countries. Over 10 years, the compound effect is not a trade diversion of a few $100 billion. It is the creation of entirely new economic ecosystems that America cannot access without dismantling its own tariff regime. And the longer the tariffs stay in place, the more permanent the exclusion becomes. Supply chains are like concrete. They are easy to pour and nearly impossible to break once they set. As we head into Tuesday, watch the following. Watch the futures markets when Asia opens tonight. If the Nikkei rallies on the coalition news while the Dow drops, the market is pricing in the new reality. Watch for the European Commission's formal response, expected by Wednesday. If Brussels announces accelerated CETA implementation, the alliance goes from framework to fait accompli. Watch the Canadian dollar. It has already strengthened against the greenback since Friday. If it breaks through 0.74, the currency markets are confirming that capital is flowing north. Watch the spread between U.S. and German 10-year yields. If it widens past 180 basis points, foreign investors are telling you they trust the Eurozone more than the United States. And watch Trump's Truth Social account at 3 a.m., because that is when you will see whether the response is policy or panic. Sources inside the White House say the president is being urged to invoke Section 301 trade investigations against every coalition member simultaneously, a legal blunderbuss that would take months to implement and years to resolve. Others are pushing for executive orders freezing Canadian assets, a move that would trigger the Mutual Defense Clause and potentially cause a run on cross-border financial instruments worth over $800 billion. The moderate voices have been purged. The people left in the room are the ones who believe that escalation is the only strategy. A rational actor would pick up the phone and call Carney. But Trump has never been a rational actor when his ego is wounded, and this wound is the deepest of his presidency. The coalition is forming, the trade routes are being redrawn, the supply chains are being redirected, and the country that started the trade war is about to discover the oldest lesson in economic history. When you build walls, people build roads around them. 12 nations have done exactly that. The road goes from Ottawa to Tokyo to London to Singapore, and it does not pass through Washington. Subscribe. Stay tuned. The history books are not being written this weekend. They are being written right now, and America is not holding the pen.